Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It is always up to speed with Formula One. It is Thursday, November 25th, 2021. Happy Thanksgiving to all of our friends south of the border, enjoying your turkey dinner, enjoying the start to the holidays. So from us to you, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And hey, save us a piece of pumpkin pie at the very least. We're big fans. We're big fans of the pumpkin pie. So we can't enjoy it today, but we're there with you in spirit. But with us, not in spirit, in person, in the sunny, sandy, lovely, warm-looking desert paradise of Dubai, Mr. Mark Hamilton. How are you, sir? That looks like a big sunny grin. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, and I could absolutely do with a piece of pumpkin pie. And I don't know if I shared this on the podcast before, but I always hated pumpkin pie. And I went to a Thanksgiving dinner years ago, and I had to pick up a pumpkin pie from Whole Foods on the way. But I was so angry that I had to pay Whole Foods money for a pumpkin pie that I insisted that I would eat some. I wasn't gonna let everyone else enjoy it, and I fell in love with it. So now I'm a big pumpkin pie advocate, and I think it's more of an American thing, but certainly people up here in October definitely integrate it into their Thanksgiving dinner. And just on that note as well, I think we would be remiss if we miss this, but people ask us all the time about when should we buy F1 merch, what's good pricing, are there ever sales? Did a little bit of a peek last night. It looks like almost all of the teams have some really aggressive Black Friday sales now. So it's a great opportunity for the teams to clear out their 2021 merch ahead of the 2022 season. But if you're looking for anything, Alfa Romeo right now, 50% off everything. Alpine up to 50% off. Aston Martin has 40% off everything on their website. I looked at the Mercedes site, heavy discounts across the board as well. Red Bull up to 50% off select items. Williams has everything on their site on sale. And as usual, Ferrari has no discounts at all. But if you are looking to grab some F1 merch, again, maybe some Christmas gifts, now is definitely a good time to do it.
Yeah, I mean, Ferrari not putting anything on sale is just peak Formula One, shall we say, snootiness. That's actually kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, definitely go check it out. This is about as good as it's going to get all year long. So you might as well jump in on some deals if you got some spare cash. All right. Well, Mark, first of all, before we get into the show itself, we could know in as short or soon as 9 days from now who the 2021 Formula One World Drivers Champion is if everything goes Max's way at Jeddah at the Saudi Grand Prix. And that is just amazing. I mean, there's only two races left, but that's a little bit of a reality check.
Absolutely. And I know that from a championship standing perspective, they're only separated by 8 points. But absolutely, despite the fact that the momentum appears to be with Lewis and appears to be with Mercedes right now, an awful lot still has to go right for Mercedes and for Lewis to win this title. Lewis really has to win both of those races because I don't see any world where Max suddenly makes mistakes or they suddenly encounter some reliability issues. But you're right. We've been enjoying this championship now for 6, 7, 8 months. It's been a bit of a grind at times. It's been thrilling at others, but in as short as 9 days, we may know who the champion is. And of course, I am praying that that is not the case because I need the championship to be decided the following week in Abu Dhabi so I can report live. And I still don't know how we're going to do that. Maybe I'll live stream from the track, but yeah, we could have a champion decided in as soon as 9 days from today.
That is amazing. I mean, it's just so funny how quick and this season is gone. But at the same time, it seems like an awfully long time ago. If you really think back to the first race of the year at Bahrain, I mean, that was the first time that we saw Lewis and Max have a little bit of well, it wasn't really an incident. I mean, Max went wide, he exceeded track limits, he had to give the position back, but it was kind of a taste of things to come, and that theme has it's kind of perpetuated itself through the season. It's crescendoed and peaked a couple of times, and well, still everything to play for with two races to go.
I've had a few people reach out to me over the course of the last couple of days as well with reminders about Baku. And if you don't recall Baku, and I'm sure you do, that was the race where Max had that very scary tire failure, DNF,
Yeah.
didn't score any points. On the restart, Lewis commits an unforced error in a position where he could possibly have captured 25 points. So the reality is, Max is up by 8 points, but had Hamilton not committed that unforced error and closed out the win in that race, he could be up by 17. And I know that was early in the season, but I remember you and I remarking that, hey, we could be reflecting back on this moment as a deciding moment within the championship. And of course, it hasn't decided anything yet, but it
Hmm.
could be. And I think just like we look back and Matt Lewis fans look back at Malaysia in 2016 when Hamilton had that engine failure and they rue that that's where the championship was lost. If Max does win, I'm sure that Lewis fans, the Mercedes fans, will probably reflect back on Baku and think, hey, that's where this championship was ultimately decided, was in that moment.
It's kind of funny to think that a race that was only what, about sixth, seventh on the calendar. I mean, it was a long, long time ago now. I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but I mean, it won't be as a dramatic kind of incident. I mean, it's dramatic when it happened, but I mean, in context compared to 2016. When Lewis had that engine failure in Malaysia, there was still what, 3 races to go after that, or
Yeah,
something
3
like that,
left.
3, 4, something like that. I mean, it came at that really, really crucial point, and then I mean, from there on out, I mean, Lewis was really behind the eight ball even more, and Nico from that point he was basically just managing the car home, just scoring the points that he
Yep.
needed, not getting his
Yep.
nose dirty, not risking the car in any way, shape, or form, and just making Lewis do all the work. I mean, it came down to an exciting finale in Yas, but yeah, who knows? There's still plenty of racing, and I am so looking forward to this track at Jeddah next weekend. I mean, when you see some of the simulations, and I mean, I can't wait to see what it's like for with like the cars on that. I mean, just from a gaming point of view, I can't believe that this hasn't been included in the 2021 Formula One game. It just looks like a blast to drive, even for a gamer.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It looks like something that was designed for a video game. It's a little bit surreal that this is going to translate into a real brick and mortar and aggregate track.
Yeah.
Kudos, obviously, to the race organizers for bringing this together. I think there was a lot of concern over the last couple of months that this maybe isn't going to happen. It
Hmm.
looks like, at least from a race operations perspective, they're going to be good. And we're obviously going to have cars on that track a week, actually less than a week from today, 6 days from now. And we're going to start recording some times in free practice 1 and free practice 2. So we'll see how it goes. Again, I think obviously it's a new track to the drivers. I think what's going to be a little bit unpredictable is the grip. Like, obviously, we haven't had a situation where we've had a lot of tires running over that aggregate. Is it going to be slippery? Is it going to be slidey? Are the drivers going to be very cautious? So I'm going to be very curious to see what the feedback from the drivers is after those initial free practice sessions on the Friday, because I want to get a sense if they're confident out there. I want to get a sense if they are taking it a little bit more cautiously. It'll be interesting to know, but we got a good week until we can hear from the drivers.
Oh yeah, totally. I think it's going to be very much like we saw in Turkey last year when they resurfaced the track at Istanbul Park there. But I mean, the big difference between Jeddah and Istanbul is that after they resurfaced the track, I mean, they had all that inclement weather that washed anything that was on the track, and you had all the oil and the grease and everything that
Yeah.
just is just normal for fresh pavement, anyways, and made it really, really slippery. So I mean, at least from that to that point of view, I mean, being in Saudi Arabia, being in the desert, being where it's warm and hot and sunny, that the odds that there's going to be rain in the next week is virtually nil. And I think that over the course of the weekend, that obviously as they get used to the track, as they put more rubber down on it, that the times are just going to get faster and faster and faster. I'm really looking forward to seeing this track in action. But talking about the championship itself, Max, this is interesting. Max is the 47th Formula One driver to have a shot at winning the championship. And when you think about it, all the dynasties that you have in Formula One, with the Sennas, the Schumachers, all these great names, the Fangios, that with 71 championships nearly under our belts, that there's more than 50% of those have been, 47 drivers have had a chance to win one. I mean, it's not like there's been a different one every year, but I mean, when you look at all these championships, that multiple world champions like Lauda, Hamilton, Senna, Prost, Fangio, all these guys that won multiple world champions, that this many different, this such a large number of drivers have had a shot at it is an interesting statistic.
It's definitely an interesting statistic. And I think oftentimes we reflect on those that have won chips or won multiple chips. But I
Hmm.
think if you look back, look at Felipe Massa in 2008. This is somebody
Yeah.
who had a championship clutched away from him in the seconds after he finished the finish line in Brazil. But it is interesting that there have been that many drivers that have had a championship within their reach. And Max obviously now has a championship within his reach. I don't want to say it's his to lose, but he certainly has an advantage being up 8 points going into the last couple of races. But it is startling that so many different people, and maybe it's not, but it maybe speaks to the fact that historically there's maybe been a little bit more parity than we give the sport credit for, despite the fact that we've had periods of dominance with, of course, Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton.
I just wanted to get your take on Max's comments this week that winning the championship is the final goal, as he put it, and anything after that, any multiple championships don't really matter. What do you make of that? Because maybe I'll give you something to think about. That if Max wins the championship this year or next year or 5 years down the road, whatever it is, I mean, obviously this guy has what it takes to become a champion. It's just a question of when. And I don't know if this is one of these comments that can be, I guess it could be interpreted in a couple of ways, but I think that when you look where Max is, he's still trying to establish himself as one of the greats in the sports. Obvious, he's only 24 years old. Lewis is 35. He's got 7 chips already, going for 8, which would make him the out and out GOAT, undisputed. And that's it's he's obviously in legacy mode, right? I mean, I still think that the desire is there from Lewis. I mean, we've talked about it before where his motivations are, but I think that Max, if he won it, I don't think that necessarily means he would pull a Nico Rosberg and hang up his gloves and helmet and walk away. But I think that anything after that is almost like for him for like legacy building. I think he'd still be focused. I think he'd still be as intensely motivated to do Formula One up until the point that he would just get up and walk away. And that's, I think, is the big question. Would he stay in Formula One you know, for another decade or till his late 30s or early 40s, like Raikkonen or Alonso or any of the other guys that have really had long careers in Formula One? I'm not so convinced. I think that one of these days that Max would just kind of think, I've done everything I needed to do here, and I'm going to go and just do whatever's next, whatever that might be. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine because I don't know what Max does when he's not driving a Formula One car, to be honest.
I completely agree. And I'm equally as confused that if he wasn't focused and dialed in on Formula One and Formula One prep 24/7, I don't necessarily know what else he would have to do. But at the same time, I was equally as surprised when Nico Rosberg won a title and walked away. And I certainly don't think, and I wouldn't suggest for a second, that Max is positioning himself to leave the sport if he wins the championship this year. But I did think it
No,
was
not at all.
interesting that he made these comments about the fact that, hey, my final goal is a championship. And I think the challenge sometimes is we're colored as North American sports fans because the culture and identifying greatness within North American sports has changed so much in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, really accelerated by folks like Michael Jordan, where, hey, winning one championship, winning one chip is not enough anymore. It's how many chips did you get? Jordan obviously has
Hmm.
6, and LeBron has 4, and Kobe has 5. And if you look at the NFL, you can talk about the greats, but it's not so much the greats as in having won a single championship, but how many championships have you won? And I think sometimes now we're starting to talk about Formula One in that sense as well, where, hey, being a world championship is great, or being a world champion is great, but how many world championships did you win if you want to be on that Mount Rushmore of the all-time greats? And I think it would be a shame for obviously Max to win a title and then change his approach to the sport or leave the sport entirely. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but I do agree with his comment that I think the pressure would be very different if he can win a
Hmm.
title, if he can overcome all of the, I don't think that he's really overcoming any odds, but if he manages to win a title and he does so ahead of Lewis Hamilton and that incredible Mercedes beast, I think that relieves a tremendous amount of pressure. He is a world champion. Nobody can take that away from him. But then he maybe likely finds renewed energy and incentive and interest in competing subsequent to that anyways. But I think he's probably in this zone right now where there's this tremendous pressure to win a title. And I think that pressure is not going to go away until he gets that title. And I think pressure will
Hmm.
return, but it will be a different type of pressure because nobody can ever take away from the fact that, hey, you are a world champion, Max Verstappen.
Totally, and I think that if Max is able to pull it off and win this championship in 2021, I think it has to go down as one of the all-time great championship
Agreed.
wins in the
Agreed.
sport because he's facing Lewis, who is still obviously very much in the prime of his career. he's had the best car, certainly over the last number of years, certainly over the last couple of races. I mean, that W12 has just been at a different level the last two races. So I mean, that's posed another difficulty for Max, as you outlined so nicely. There was that DNF in Baku because of the tire failure, but still, I mean, it's been a great battle to watch, and to be that guy that finally wrests the drivers' championship away from a Mercedes driver will be notable, due to the fact that nobody's been able to do it pre 2014, or since 2014, I should say, and before this turbo hybrid era. And it would almost be fitting, considering that these cars literally just only have a couple of hundred miles left to run before they're, consigned to the museums and car collectors collections of the world, for those people who are actually in the market to afford a Formula One car for their collection, that is. And then we're into an all new uncharted territory that's all brand new, so it's going to be very, very exciting to watch. Anyways, time for a quick break. We'll come back on the flip side, still plenty more to talk about, so don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. And I really, really wish that I'd made a quick stop to go down to the store just now. I'm sure that even though it's not Thanksgiving up here in Canada today, I'm sure that there must be pumpkin pie available. There's got to be a couple at least in stock at any decent grocery store. And now I must admit I'm really quite craving one, So, anyways, let's talk about Formula One. Let's not talk about comfort foods and things like that, because that's just not going to end anywhere good. Because then, as soon as we finish the show, I'm going to go upstairs and binge, and it's probably not a good idea at this time of night. So next up, so the Spanish Grand Prix is apparently on the cusp of signing a new 5-year deal with Formula One to keep the Spanish Grand Prix at the Catalan circuit of Barcelona. Lovely place, lovely city, wonderful circuit. Maybe not the most exciting track on the calendar, but certainly a wonderful place to go and watch a race. Certainly a world class city to go and visit. So I'm excited to hear this. I mean, this used to be the traditional home of winter testing, and I think that's part of the reason why racing sometimes here can be a little bit predictable, because I think that most of the
Mm.
drivers know this track literally inside and out, and they could drive it with their eyes closed at times. But Spanish Grand Prix I think is an important one to keep on the calendar, and I'd be happy to see them extend for another number of years.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add on this other than the fact that just 2 years ago, it looked like this track was going to be gone permanently. And they had a 1 year reprieve, and then they had another 1 year reprieve because of the pandemic. But it's funny what the presence of two world class Spanish drivers in the sport does to stimulate interest. And I think obviously Carlos Sainz was around when it looked like we were going to lose this track. But I think the return of Fernando Alonso has done an awful lot to cement the interest of the local government and the race organizers in committing to a long-term deal. So I agree with you. It's good news. I'd like to see these traditional tracks on the circuit. The other good news, and this hasn't been openly reported yet, but it sounds like the track organizers have committed to not significant, but some not so insignificant upgrades to the track as well. So it looks like they're going to be doing some work on a couple of the corners to reprofile them in the effort of increasing overtaking, and some of the logistical natures or aspects of the track, including garages and pit entry and things like that, will be upgraded as well over the course of the next couple of years. So we're going to keep Spain around for a couple of years. Why not? 10% of the drivers on the grid are Spanish, and I think we're going to get some upgrades as a byproduct. So good news story.
Definitely. I think one of the things that really worked for the Spanish Grand Prix this year was the fact that I think they restored, what was it, corner 10 or 11 or something, like at the back end of the
Right.
circuit. They restored it to its original layout. And I thought that really made it a little bit better around as you go through that last series of corners before you get to the chicane before start finish and the pit entry. But glad to hear that they're going to reprofile some of these corners as well, which is a trend that we're seeing at other tracks. That
Definitely.
yeah, that
Definitely.
Albert Park in Melbourne is another one, and sadly we didn't get a chance to see that this year. So really looking forward to seeing that. We saw what they did. I mean, it had been obviously 30, almost 40 years since Formula One last went to Zandvoort in Holland. But I mean, the banking that they did to reprofile that corner was pretty cool. That worked. And really looking forward to seeing the changes at Yas Marina in a couple of weeks as well. And also, like I say, I mean, Barcelona really is, from a fan's perspective, that if you can take one of the shuttle buses from the city to the track itself, you get dropped off, and I mean, you're literally probably an eighth of a mile from the main gates at just at the main grandstand by start finish, and it doesn't really get any better than that. So anyhow, that might be one of these ones we save for a future race or for a future show of races that that you should go and visit. Anyways, talking about Spanish drivers, Fernando Alonso, remember him? 40 something years old, two world championships, back in Formula One, scored a podium last week at the Qatar Grand Prix. He is arguably, well, I guess it depending on your point of view, he's definitely a very polarizing figure. You either love him or hate him. Could you classify him as one of Formula One's all-time stars? I guess maybe that is dependent on my previous comment of either you love Nando or you hate Nando. But certainly, I mean, he has had a lot of success in Formula One. Won two world championships a very long time ago, but he's rocked some boats, burnt some bridges. But he says he doesn't actually feel shortchanged or disappointed by the fact that he got his championship so early in his career, and it's been a long time since he's had any level of success. I mean, his third in Qatar was his first podium since Hungary in 2014 when he was still driving for Ferrari.
Wow. Yeah, Fernando, I like the way that you put that, and I'm just collecting my thoughts on this one. It is funny because he does have a really, really rich base of fans, and not surprisingly, perhaps a lot of those fans are folks that have been around for 10 or 15 years and were there during the glory days of that '05 and '06 Renault title. I think obviously one of the things that colors people's perception of him is he left Renault, went to McLaren. That was a really ugly experience. He went back to Renault. During his time with Renault, they were colored by Crashgate. Of course, the McLaren team were colored by Spygate. He does go to Ferrari at one point where he manages to come close a couple of times. But I think that the comment here is, he did win a couple of chips. He won in '05 with Renault. He won again in '06 with Renault. He 2007 in that very, 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 I would say, choppy year with McLaren. That said, he still only finished a point back from the championship. 2010, he finished second. 2012, he finished second. That was an incredibly, incredibly close championship. And again, 2013, he finished second. So in these 3 years alone, he finished, I think, maybe just 8 points out from potentially 3 more titles. So I think the debate will always be, did he win as many championships as he should have? Did he secure as many chips as were available to him? But obviously, he has a loyal base of fans, and a lot of those were folks that were around and remember him winning. Because for most of the folks that are joining Drive to Survive now, either this is their first glimpse of him on the track, or they caught the very tail end of that McLaren period, which was
Mm-hmm.
obviously a little bit dicey and not necessarily a particularly friendly relationship. I think it was probably just more hostile than anything. So for a lot of people, hearing about Fernando Alonso, this may be the first time they've heard a little bit about him. But again, he did win a couple of chips. Curiously, he actually announced his departure from Renault in 2006 before he actually won that championship. So even before he'd won the '06 championship, he'd announced that he was going to go to McLaren. So he does win the '06 championship, knowing that he's out, goes to McLaren, finishes a point out in the championship. Obviously, that situation with the rookie Hamilton didn't work out. The team was in disarray, and he goes right back to Renault. That doesn't work out. Renault ultimately exits the sport, and he makes the move over to Ferrari, where he finishes runner-up 3 times. But obviously, a tremendously talented driver, and I thought it was really, really great to see him on the podium last weekend at, 42 years of age? Sorry, 40 years of age. I think he's my age. So, yeah, he's probably got a couple of years left. At least I think that's what he's hoping.
Well, that's the thing he said on the Beyond the Grid podcast, that he wants to stay active in Formula One after next year. He says that he's maybe not as concerned if Alpine isn't super competitive next year. But I mean, what else is he really going to say? I mean, I think he still has something to offer the team. I don't know if there's anyone else that they could necessarily put in that car that would be an immediate upgrade. I mean, he still shows pace. I mean, he was obviously very good in Qatar. I mean, he showed in those opening laps there that he's still got that killer instinct. I mean, just look how he pushed Max wide there at turn 3 or turn 2 or whatever it was right on the opening lap. So I mean, that aggressiveness is still there, which you obviously need in a driver. But I mean, the thing is, and this is not a knock on Fernando. I mean, it happens to all of us that as you age, your reaction times and physically you just start to slow down. And I mean, he still might be a phenomenally athletic and talented person, but when you have to react literally in nanoseconds in Formula One, just that natural aging, just at some point it's going to catch up with him, right? But
Yeah.
certainly, I mean, he's a fascinating case study. I mean, we could probably rip off a number of shows dedicated to the career of Fernando Alonso. And let's not forget, I mean, he's won Le Mans, what, twice already? I don't know if
Oh,
he's,
great point. Great
you know,
point.
I don't know if he's maybe given up on that pipe dream to win the Triple Crown and try and win the 500 as well. I mean, he gave a good go at it. I mean, he had a very good run there in 2017, and then retired. It was less than 50 laps to the finish. I mean,
Yep.
he was still right up there in the top of the running order. So I mean,
Yep.
he had a good crack at it, and I mean, you can't fault him for trying. Anyways, let's move along now, and everybody's favorite Russian oligarch, and this is Nikita Mazepin's father. He is obviously the head of Uralkali, which is a big Russian chemical company, and obviously the chief sponsor of Haas. And they've talked about increasing their their stake in the team. And this is Dmitry Mazepin, Nikita's father. And this is just a way to incentivize the staff members over what's going to be a very, very intense and difficult season next year. I mean, there's a number of interesting quotes that have, Dmitry Mazepin made this week, and I think that where is it? I've got in my notes here somewhere that I wanted to just point it out because it was here. Okay, so he says, quote, "We have big ambitions in motorsport, and we have had an unsuccessful attempt to buy a Formula One team. It is still a possibility for us. It is not related to Nikita, but it is determined by our long-term plans. On the contrary, we want to expand our presence in F1," end quote. So he didn't really outline what it was that he's going to do to try and incentivize and keep the team members at Haas motivated over what's going to be a very difficult season. I mean, he was I thought, very gracious in his comments about what the team has achieved this year. I mean, obviously, neither Nikita Mazepin or Mick Schumacher have really done anything of note, and Nikita has made more negative headlines than positive ones this year, sadly, and even before the year started. But I mean, his dad was I thought that he was quite polite about it, saying that, quote, we are grateful to the team that we found a mutual interest in entering into this kind of agreement. The team has been working hard, but we see big opportunities which we can realize through joint efforts to achieve a higher result next year, end quote. So it's been well known that Haas has been focusing on their 2022 car and has basically stopped development of the current car. And so who knows, are they going to get it right? I mean, it's a disappointing team because when they came into Formula One quite a while ago now, I mean, it's more than several years ago. I mean, they had some flashes the first couple of years. I mean, the investment from the owners just sadly isn't there. And I mean, they've just been on the life support, but it seems that whatever happens with Haas in the future to come, that is going to come via the pocketbook of Dmitry Mazepin.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think these are interesting comments, and I think what this really is an acknowledgement of the fact that this year they effectively tanked, and they didn't tank in the sense that you do in the NBA, but they tanked in the sense that, hey, we are going to take all of our limited resources and invest everything into the 2022 car. The Haas car that we are seeing this year is the 2021 car. End of story. They're putting nothing into it. It hasn't been improved since last year whatsoever. The only changes have been those to align with the aero regulations. So I think if you work in the factory, if you're a mechanic, if you work in sales, it's probably really tough week after week to know you have zero chance of improving, you have zero chance of winning, you have zero chance of scoring points. And I think even if you're not necessarily a championship contender, having a good weekend and scoring some points and getting a surprise finish and breaking through to Q2, I think these are the type of things that energize your factory staff, the folks back at the office. And I think this team's enjoyed none of that this year. And I think for that reason, it's probably been a bit dispiriting to be a part of that organization. And I think equally as much, it's been really challenging to see the lack of performance and pace out of one of your two drivers. So obviously, we don't really know what that car is capable of because we have two rookies driving it. But what we are seeing is a tremendous delta between Nikita and MS see. But maybe next year things improve. Obviously, they're going to be coming back with a completely reworked and redesigned car, and maybe they're in a position where they can start scoring some points. But I would say, incentive plan or not, the one thing that would energize people within this team is success, whether that's breaking through to Q2, whether that's scoring a seventh and eighth and ninth place finish with some surprising points. Give them something to rally about, give them something to be excited about. I don't know. Maybe everybody in the team understands the philosophy and that this year was effectively going to be a write off and they were going to tread water until 2022. I don't know. Maybe they understand that and everyone's on board with that vision. I can't imagine it's easy to go through the paces of a Formula One season knowing that you're never going to score points and you're never going to break out a Q3.
It's interesting too. I mean, his comments again saying that as sponsors they want to be more involved with the team. I'm not sure how that works unless maybe Dimitri's going to run down to the local McDonald's in Kannapolis and get burgers for everybody. But I mean, it is interesting to hear the comments from like obviously a title sponsor like that, and obviously, I mean, he still has designs on owning a Formula One team. It
No
sounds like
question.
maybe a bit of the bitterness of losing out in that bid to take over Force India that was snatched away from him by Lawrence Stroll and his consortium a couple of years ago. I mean, that still has to sting. That's still got to be on, on his mind. And I still think at some point that I can't believe that that Gene Haas is going to hang on to this team forever because he thinks at some point that they're going to be a big dog in Formula One. I still think that if the right offer comes along, that Gene will be more than happy to take a check from somebody and walk away from it. But that's just me. All right. Let's take another quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about those guys that didn't count or discount any of their merch for Black Friday, and that's Ferrari. So we'll do so in just a moment. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, well, welcome back to the show. Mattia Bonato, team principal at Ferrari, said this week that their main goal for 2021 was not third place in the constructors' championship. And again, this is very, very interesting language coming from the higher ups at Ferrari. That I think that the messaging and the tone that they've had over the past year and a half to 2 years has remained very consistent, very, I wouldn't say that they're lowballing their expectations, but very measured in what they are planning or what their goals and their aims are, because they're obviously still a little ways off from Red Bull. They're still a ways off from Mercedes. This is not the Ferrari that was contending potentially for championships in the past several years and threatening and challenging Mercedes on a regular basis. But it was interesting. So Mattia's comments are as follows, quote, all of our efforts were focused on the car for 2022 from the start. We never compromised on that. So it never crossed our minds to try at any point to penalize 2022 in favor of 2021. Not even a view in the battle for third place, end quote. And again, maybe that is similar. It's a bit of a twist on what they've said before. It's similar. I mean, to the fact that, well, I mean, it's identical to the fact that they said they were never going to compromise the development of next year's car. But I mean, the overall sort of theme is that we still expect to be a couple years off from winning races and challenging for podiums and championships and all that sort of stuff. That talk has kind of disappeared a little bit, and I think maybe themselves are they're realizing probably what everybody else does, and they should have a better indication than what we do on the outside, is the fact that next year is just this big unknown, and we really won't know until we get a race or two under our belts, or maybe three, four, whatever it is, what the pecking order is, who's got it right, who's got it wrong, and who has some potential and who's screwed for 2022.
This messaging is exactly consistent with what we've been hearing from Ferrari since the end of last year. They were very clear during the offseason to level set and calibrate the expectations of the media in that we do not expect to win in 2021. Winning is not our ambition in 2021. We are building towards 2022. So similar in a way to Haas. Now, that said, they've obviously been able to bring a better, more competitive package to the car. And they probably had some understanding that they were going to be more competitive than they were indicating to the media they would be. But I think it was smart from their perspective that administratively, logistically, they spoke very cautiously about what their expectations were going to be be for the season. If they were to come out during the offseason and say, hey, we expect to finish third in a transition year, and that doesn't happen, well, that opens them up for criticism. I think what they've been doing here is very measured. It's the right way of addressing the analysts, of addressing the media. Hey, you know what? We're not building for 2021. We're building for 2022, 2023. This year has been a nice surprise. And I've enjoyed seeing it. And I also believe that this is a team who maybe not even sneakily, but could very much be a contender next year, because they seem to have, with their most recent engine upgrades, they seem to have dialed in a really great power unit. And that's important because at the end of the year, that power unit's going to be frozen. And that's what they're going to have to carry through to at least the end of 2025. But I think their strategy during the offseason was very good, which was to downplay their own internal expectations, because they didn't want to take on the criticisms that could come with that if they don't meet those in a weird transition year that is 2021.
You know, it's also interesting too. Some of the other quotes from Mattia Binotto this week is that with the all the efforts that they put into the 2022 car and everything that they're working on. I mean, it's obviously been a strain because they're in between. I mean, you know, they're still racing with this car that they have. They're still looking ahead to the future. And then Mattia was pretty blunt and pretty upfront in saying that he just can't wait for this season to end because it has just been very, very difficult and doing these, trying to have one foot in both worlds. But hey, that's no different than the other 9 Formula 1 teams. Everybody's going through it. But guys, just hang on there for a little while longer. You're almost there. And I mean, we're still so excited, all of us, just in general, to see what comes out next year. I mean, as excited as I am to watch these last couple of races and see what happens in the championship. Is Max going to win? Is Lewis going to win? Who's going to win the constructors? Part of me wants to like skip fast forward to 2 months from now as these new cars get released, as they go to winter testing, as we get ready to go to get racing again in 2022. It's exciting, but hey, we're almost there. Okay, and another Ferrari story is that 22-year-old Robert Schwartzman is going to go and have a test with Haas F1 at the Abu Dhabi rookie test that's upcoming at the end of the season. So he was Mick Schumacher's teammate at Prema Racing in Formula 2 last season. He finished fourth in the championship with 4 wins, and he's third in the Formula 2 standings this year. He was also the 2019 F3 championship, and he will get behind the wheel of the Haas at the rookie test that will take in the week after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, pardon me, in just a couple of weeks from now. Just trust me to stumble over the words there. Anyways, your thoughts on Schwartzman's opportunity to get a test in a Formula One car?
Yeah, wins the F3 championship in 2019, finishes fourth last year, currently trending third this year. He's tested a Formula One car before. I think he tested the 2020 Ferrari car a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear now that it's unlikely that there's a clear pathway for him to find his way into Formula One. I think it's nice that he's going to get a test. And again, I think you and I are big advocates for getting young drivers into Formula One cars for all of the reasons that that's good, whether it's just giving them reps, giving them exposure, providing exposure to the fans of young up and coming drivers who maybe don't tune into F2 and F3. I feel a little bit like this is the end of the song for him. You don't get to have 3 or 4 shots normally at Formula 2, and he hasn't won a Formula 2 title. He's not going to do it this year. He did get that F3 chip, but I would suggest this might be the last that we see of him in terms of testing. Maybe he ends up in a simulator type position or a test driver position, but I think that clear pathway that we maybe thought he had to an F1 seat as recently as 2 years ago seems to have evaporated.
It is kind of going back to this conversation that we've had before, like with other drivers like Nick DeFries, right? I mean, there's such a good crop of young drivers in Formula One right now, and just the fact that a Formula One seat is such a scarce commodity. I mean, there's only 20 of them available. They don't
So
really
true.
change very often, and the window to get into one of these Formula One cars is so small. I mean, you look at Antonio Giovinazzi at Alfa Romeo. I mean, he's been in that car for a couple of years now. I mean, he's out at the end of the year in favor of Guan Yu Zhou, who's going to come in next year and take his seat alongside Valtteri Bottas. I mean, you know, and I think that Giovinazzi's kind of made these comments that there's obviously a bit of bitterness there because he feels like he's maybe losing his seat to a guy that's got a fair amount of sponsorship money and things like that. But I mean, the window to get into a Formula One car is so small. You just it's almost a little bit of luck if you're maybe not one of these sort of predestined you know what do you want to call it? Almost these virtuosos that seem predestined to get into the sport one way or another. That these other guys that are also very, very competent and very, very good racing drivers, that if it just doesn't line up with, the stars don't align, for lack of a better way to put it, that window just it comes or it doesn't come, or if it does, it just doesn't last very long, and their tenure in Formula One is very, very short.
Definitely. It is interesting as well. And I don't think a lot of people probably know, but Schwartzman is Russian, just like Nikita Mazepin, just like Daniel Kvyat. And it's interesting because I don't know necessarily a lot about the development programs in that country in terms of motorsports. Obviously, Daniel Kvyat didn't come from a wealthy family. Schwartzman's, I think, upper middle class. And obviously, Nikita Mazepin is the son of an oligarch. But I'd like to know a little bit more about motorsports development in that
Mm-hmm.
country to try to understand why we're seeing so many talented young drivers come through those ranks when obviously, and we know why it's not necessarily happening from the US. There's just countless other motorsports opportunities for young drivers, whether it's Indy or stock car or something else. But it is curious that Russia seems to be generating a pretty significant stream of young talent.
Across some very different social backgrounds,
Yeah.
as you mentioned. I mean, one from a very, very wealthy family, another one upper middle class, and then Danny Kvyat, just like you say, just from a normal blue collar working family. I mean, that's quite a spread of quite a demographic there. So that's interesting. Okay, next one. This is interesting to talk about. So Aston Martin has headhunted Mercedes Aero Chief, and this fellow's name is Eric Blandin. He's French, and this is a big, big name that has been lured away from Mercedes to join the operation at Aston Martin. Now, this is not going to be something that happens instantaneously because Mr. Blandin is going to have his customary and traditional gardening leave, meaning that he will not join Aston Martin until October 2022. I mean, gosh, man, whatever happened to giving your 2 weeks notice and then you go and show up for the new? Oh, that's right. So we work normal jobs where we don't get things like gardening leave and all these things like that. But anyways, I mean, joking aside, a spokesperson from Aston Martin said earlier this week, quote, "We confirmed that Eric Blandin will begin working for Aston Martin and Cognizant F1 team next year. His exact start date is not yet confirmed. The transition from Mercedes AMG F1 team to ourselves will be an amicable one," end quote. So Blondin started his career in Formula One at the Italian wind tunnel Fundamental Technologies in 98, moved to Jaguar Racing as an aerodynamicist in 2002. He stayed with the team after they changed from Jaguar into Red Bull Racing. And he was the head of the aero team before he left there in 2009. And he's been, no, I mean, he's been pretty much all over the place. He's also been to Ferrari, joined Mercedes in 2011 as their principal aerodynamicist, and he was promoted to Mercedes chief aerodynamicist in September 2017. So, I mean, this is a very, very smart fellow, a very experienced fellow in Formula One who's worked for some of the biggest teams, obviously. And Lawrence Stroll is obviously, and Otmar Safnauer, our team principal, are very excited that Eric Blandin will be joining the team. And, how do you work in the interim? I guess you just it's almost like that anticipation for Christmas, knowing that that
Yeah.
this the
Yep.
big shiny present is going to show up at some point. But I mean, this joking aside, this is a crucial big signing for Aston Martin.
Absolutely, especially given their aero design deficiencies this year. But this is a guy who, like you said, joined the Mercedes team during the V8 era, functioned as the chief, and I always struggle with this word, so forgive me, but he functioned as the chief aerodynamicist. I got it.
Here you go.
Well, actually, no, he
Bravo.
was principal aerodynamicist from 2011. So the tail end of that V8 era into, I would say, the third year of the V6 turbo era. And then coincidentally, he becomes the chief aerodynamicist in 2017. And the reason that's important is that was the year that F1 overhauled their aero regulations. So big tires, big wings. They wanted to create more downforce. They wanted more speed in the corners. They wanted more overtaking. So he was a big part in the backbone of redesigning those Mercedes cars. And if you remember, there was absolutely no hiccups when they transitioned from the 2016 spec cars into the 2017 spec cars. So to your point as well, it just reinforces that Lawrence Stroll is willing to pay whatever it takes to bring the right people over to that Silverstone factory to build a winner. And if not next year or the year after, I know he's talking about, hey, his vision is to have a championship contending team within the next 5 years. I certainly think he's going to get there with some of the people that he's bringing aboard.
It's interesting too. Some of the comments, just going back to that, you really nicely pointed out that transition to the 2017 regs, which we've seen perpetuated and modified right up to the current day. But Lewis Hamilton was saying this week that the W12 is what he calls a monster diva in terms of it being a really, really tricky and fickle car to get the setup just right, because the 2017 car, which I guess would, if I do my math right, would be the W9, was the car that Toto Wolff termed or coined the original diva. And that one was also difficult to set up initially, but this year's car is proving to be even more so. I mean, hard to believe, considering how well that car has run, especially over the last couple of races. But very interesting. Like I say, a very crucial appointment for Aston Martin. Anyways, let's take another quick break. A couple more things to talk about. Maybe we'll jump into the mailbag if we have a little bit of time. Anyways, don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome back to the show. And I guess this is a case of better late than never, but shame on us. Mark, please remind everybody about the contest that we have going on right now. We jumped right into the Black Friday sale, so you can see where everybody's mentality is. But we are running a contest for our good friend Magnus Greaves over at the raceweekend.com, Race Weekend Magazine. Obviously, we're big fans of the content that they're putting out. Mark, let the good people at home know how
My
they can get on
gosh,
this.
what a shame on me. We put this at the very top of the agenda and then we missed it. So we have a contest. Now, this contest is closing soon. It closes on December 8th. We're going to announce it on the subsequent show heading into the Yas Marina weekend. But we are giving away, in collaboration with the Race Weekend team, a 1-year subscription to Race White Weekend magazine. So that's 4 copies of that big, large format magazine. All you have to do to enter is follow us on Twitter, retweet that post, and like that post. That's all you need to do. So far we only have about 80 entries, which I thought we would be probably approaching 200, but we haven't had the opportunity to come on the show and talk this up too much. Go and find the tweet, like it, retweet it, make sure you follow us, and you will be automatically entered. And like I said, we're going to be drawing somebody, and my dates are a little bit mixed up because I keep doing this translation between North America time and Middle East time, but we will be doing the drawing somewhere around the 8th or the 9th. Once again, it'll be live during the podcast, just like we did the last one. And if you haven't checked it out, theraceweekend.com, if you want to get a peek at what they do and the great work that they put together, it would be worth your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should point out too that unlike the last contest that we ran, we had to limit that one to just North American entries just for logistical reasons. But this
great
one is
call. Yeah,
open
great call.
worldwide. Doesn't matter if you're here in Vancouver like me or in Dubai like Mark or anywhere in between or further beyond. Get in on it. We will get you set up, hook you up with a complimentary subscription to the Race Weekend magazine. Okay, let's move on. Lewis Hamilton says he wants to be what he calls one of the purest of F1 drivers that he can be. So there won't be any questions or doubts about his achievements in Formula One. The 7-time world champion had to say, quote, "It's just how my dad raised me. He said, always do your talking on the track. I was bullied as a kid, both at school, but also on the track. And we wanted to beat them the right way, not by a car falling off or colliding. Then there's no denying that you're better. If you have collisions, then you can say, oh yeah, but this happened. This one tactic was that this driver has. I want to be the purest of drivers through speed, through sheer hard work and determination. So there's no design at the end of what I've accomplished," end quote. Well, I don't think that there's any doubt that Lewis has done all the talking on the track in his Formula One career. But Mark, your thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, this was a story that got a lot of play this week. The timing's obviously very interesting, and obviously the reporter that was asking these questions was framing it in a contrast with some of the other great kind of drivers of all time. I'm not going to make a judgment on whether it is. Actually, I'm going to make a judgment. What the hell? We're podcasters. I think his career has been relatively unscathed in terms of really significant controversy. And, we talked a lot about this when we've been discussing Michael Schumacher over the course of the last few years. This is a guy that has 7 championships, but also a guy who was disqualified from an entire championship in 1997 for intentionally trying to run a competitor off the track. And certainly from a Lewis Hamilton perspective, if you want to index the quality of his career from a sportsmanship perspective relative to other drivers, I would have to say he's had a fairly pure career. He's been very successful, obviously, at McLaren. He's been very successful with this team. And there's no question there are criticisms of him. But in terms of contributing to the sport off the track, in terms of lobbying for social justice and social causes, he's done that. And equally as much, he has done everything asked of him on the track. And certainly there's that ongoing criticism that, hey, he should be winning championships because he's driving the best car. But even when you look at how he's performed versus somebody, a teammate that's driving an equivalent car, he's consistently outperformed them. And even in 2016, he maybe wins that championship, if not for that engine failure in Malaysia. So I like these comments. I think he's sincere. I think there's certainly some truth to this. And I don't look at his career and think that there's any very specific black mark that we're going to reflect on in 20 or 30 years when we're talking about the all-time greats in Formula One. Now, that said, he still has another 2 years left in his career, but I think it's really difficult to find fault with the 7 championships that he's won so far.
Yeah, I mean, you made a great point about Schumacher being excluded from the '97 World Championship, because if you go back and watch the Netflix documentary on Schumacher that dropped a couple of months ago, they talk about that one at length, and how, I mean, the way that they spun it was that, well, Michael didn't see it as doing anything wrong. He was just doing what it took to win, and he didn't really realize until it was explained to him what his egregious action really was. And I mean, let's think about it. I mean, some of the things that Schumacher was renowned for, I mean, there was no doubt that nobody could handle a car like him. Nobody was as fast as him. I mean, he really was on another level as a driver, like all the greats are, right? But at times he would drive a Formula One car in real life the way that I drive my Formula One car in when I'm playing PlayStation, right? So there's a little bit of difference. I mean, that incident with JV at Estoril in '97, that was one of them. Parking his car at Rascasse at Monaco in qualifying, that was another of them. I mean, there was plenty of examples that we can use. And I mean, certainly there aren't really too many incidents that you can point at Lewis Hamilton for. I mean, it's interesting too. I mean, Lewis came from a pretty humble background. They really had to work for what they got, and they didn't really have a lot to go with. But I mean, that is similar to what the Schumachers went through, because I mean, again, in that documentary, you
Right.
hear Ralph talking about how they would sometimes basically go and scrounge old tires and parts and put them on their carts and still go out and beat the other people that they were racing against, which is a testimony, I guess, not just to the Schumachers, but what they needed to do to win, but also the talent that Michael and Ralph to that extent had to succeed in karting and also in Formula One. Okay, let's move on to the next story. This one kind of fit in between. This is still dealing with Lewis, and this is going back to our friend Fernando Alonso, we were talking about earlier on in the show. So Fernando said not directly racing with Lewis Hamilton more has been a missing point, his words, for his career. I mean, as he said, he doesn't really feel that he's missed out on a lot of things, considering, especially in the latter half of his career. But obviously he wants that. Anyways, Fernando told the Beyond the Grid podcast, quote, "I think with Lewis, we didn't have, let's say, the competition that I was looking for. We shared a team, and that for the general people, this is the biggest fight that you could have. But in 2007, I think we were both not ready. Understandably, he was maybe not ready for the fight because he was a rookie and coming into Formula One, and I was not performing at my best, not really integrated with the team. For sure, we had all the fights together and all the stress together to fight for the championship, and we were not well managed at the time. We finished with the same points in the championship, which you could see was a very big fight and an even fight, but I think we both could have done better. And then in the following years, I had a better package in Ferrari than him when he was at McLaren, so we really didn't fight directly. And now when he switched to Mercedes, he had a better package, and we never had the opportunity again to fight together. So that's a missing point in my career, but obviously he's a legend in the sport, and he, like Michael, pushed to the limit because if you want to beat Lewis, you need to perform at your best," end quote. So I think this is an interesting comment from Fernando. I mean, certainly 30-year-old Fernando Alonso probably wouldn't have said that, but 40-year-old Fernando Alonso, obviously with the benefit of having life experience under his belt, sees this in a slightly different way at this point in his life and this point in his career. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, he won his two chips even before Lewis had joined Formula One. They team up in 2007. They both finished a point back in the championship to Kimi Räikkönen. Obviously, that was a problematic year for reasons we won't get into. He goes back to Renault. They have an uncompetitive car. He makes the jump to Ferrari, finishes runner up three times over the course of four seasons. At that time, McLaren's kind of middling a little bit in the middle of the field. They're winning a couple of races, but they're certainly not competing for championships. And then just as Fernando's making the move to to McLaren, Lewis makes the move to Mercedes. So it seems that whenever one of them has a great package, the other doesn't. So it is an interesting thought, and I never really thought about this, that we've never seen in all the years that the two of them have been in Formula One, with the exception of '07, we've never really seen a year where those two went head to head competing for a championship. And maybe we get that next year, because obviously with the regulation changes, the field should be brought closer together. But it is an interesting thought. And it doesn't surprise me that this is something that Alonso thinks a lot about. I'm sure that deep down, he feels like he probably should have won some additional chips. And I think it's tough for him as well that, hey, I win two chips. And then after that, Lewis goes ahead and wins seven. And I struggle with the McLaren team. I finished runner up three times with Ferrari. And of course, there was some disappointment there. But it's an interesting thought, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was interesting too the way that he says at the end that if you want to beat Lewis, you need to perform at your best, and I think that's just the thing. I mean, as much as Lewis has had superior equipment for many years, obviously, he's also been incredibly consistent as a driver, and I think
Right.
that's part of the reason too. Just to maybe on another note here, that I've enjoyed this season so much, just the battle between Lewis and with him pardon me, between himself and Max Verstappen is due to the fact that these are two drivers with two very good cars, and they're both in very good form. And there's just more to it. I mean, there was obviously that rivalry with Nico Rosberg, but that was more of a personal conflict than more than a rivalry in my mind. I mean, they obviously didn't get along together. I mean, Lewis was always going to be the faster driver, and it always felt that whenever he beat Nico, that it was just putting Nico back in his place. And whenever Nico won, it was almost him saying, "Well, I can do this kind of too. Maybe you're not as good as you think you are." I mean, there's obviously like a lot of mind games in there, but certainly, I mean, we want to see the big names, the best drivers fighting. It doesn't always work out that way. I mean, especially say for the example of Fernando and Lewis, is, as you so correctly pointed out, that when one had a good car, the other one necessarily didn't. And Fernando certainly hasn't had a good car for a good many years. Okay, one final story here. Michael Massey, the race director of Formula One, said no regulator in the world will be popular when there is a title fight as intense as the one that we have seen this year. And okay, well let's just read his quotes before I start reading into it. Mr. Massey had to say, "Quotes: There are some wise words about those that operated under a permanent stewards panel that thought that there was this perceived bias when there was permanent stewards. The stewarding that we have now with all the pool four chairmen that we share, the pool of driver stewards, and all of that. By the way, all the chairmen meet regularly." We need to take a step back and remember it's the first time in a long time we are in a real championship fight between two amazing drivers, two fantastic teams. As a regulator, last time I saw, there's no regulator in the world that's going to be popular. So, regardless, if you're a referee, if you're a regulator of any sport, that's always a part of the role that we fulfill. And from our perspective, there will always be slight differences. But at the end of the day, the stewards are there to make those. End quote. So, yeah, I mean, maybe nothing too earth shattering in those comments. I mean, nobody wants to make those unpopular calls. I mean, but the thing is, if something happens, and they have to do what they need to do. I think our
Right.
criticisms are they doing it at the correct times? Are the people that are there, are they the most qualified people to be there? I mean, Massey's comments seem to suggest that he's confident that they have access to the most experienced and the most knowledgeable people to do so. but that doesn't negate the fact that at times the way that they've managed the sport and the decisions that they've made, and some of the amount of time it's taken some of these decisions to make, or to make those decisions, hasn't been optimal throughout this season.
I literally have nothing to add. You've summarized that beautifully and captured all of my thoughts.
Okay, well, before we sign off, this is one. This is might be a little bit interesting to answer. This is an email from Thomas Andre Riesla. He says, "Hello, Mark One and Mark Two. After getting into F1, I've been a bit surprised about the way the community reacts to drama and inflammatory comments about the that the team bosses and drivers make. As a lifelong football soccer fan, I'm used to the community, players, and managers making a lot of drama. This is especially apparent in derby matches that will create the most amazing atmosphere and matches. While you do have some people that take it too far, I feel that most people are reasonable and just enjoy the spectacle. I feel like we can embrace the drama in F1 between team bosses and drivers and condemn the people that take it too far instead of letting this take away from the experience. You've said yourself a couple of times that the comments from Horner have taken away from your enjoyment of the season. From my perspective, he's just being cynical, creating storylines slash perspectives that keep adding to the rivalry with Mercedes. Rivalries are not a bad thing. Any thoughts? Best regards, Thomas Andre." Well, Thomas, thank you very much for the email. Some interesting points in there. I don't think that creating rivalries is bad in any way. I don't necessarily have any issue with one team principal maybe calling out another one. It's just my specific beef with Horner is just the way that the pointed comments that he's made. I mean, he was given a warning this week by the FIA by making a comment about the rogue marshal at Qatar last week, which Max got penalized for not lifting under the double waved yellow. Yeah, I don't mind some of these things, but just some of the things that he said have just been way too incendiary, or just a way too off base. And I think that maybe had he not been as pointed in his comments after the British Grand Prix at Silverstone in the summer, I think that maybe this one comment that he made against the one track marshal last weekend, I think maybe this one flies under the radar a little bit. I don't think he gets summoned to a hearing over that, and I don't think he gets a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, and I'm all for a little bit of drama and a little bit of fun. That's one of the reasons I think a lot of us enjoy sports and the narrative and the storylines. But
Sure.
I think the comments this year at points have been, to your point, a little bit inflammatory. And I think the fear is maybe they've been inflammatory enough that they've been activating a base of non-supporters who enter the debate and enter the fray and really have no place being there. And I think there's a certain segment of Red Bull and certain segment of Max fans that feel that the FIA or that Formula One are working against them. And I think some of Christian Horner's comments, which haven't necessarily been substantiated or substantiatable, or you can't substantiate them, have only further strengthened the noise in the empowerment of that base, and that hasn't been good. But I'm all for a little bit of drama, and I'm all for a little bit of hostility in the media. I think those are good things. But some of the comments coming out of the Red Bull camp, specifically from Marco and specifically from Christian Horner, have just been a little bit too inflammatory without being productive. And if you're going to make a criticism that's legitimate, that's great, but don't throw out criticisms that clearly can't be substantiated.
Yeah, especially that one about the track marshal. I thought that one was just
Yeah,
a bit. I mean, it was bizarre at best and conspiratorial. And it was interesting too. Some of the
exactly.
comments that Andreas Seidel, the team principal at McLaren, said this week that if they were in a similar position, fighting for a championship, they wouldn't be making similar comments. So, anyways, yeah, I think that rivalries are great, but words matter. Anyways, I love the idea. I mean, when he's talking about derby matches in soccer, I mean, there's nothing like a good rivalry match and the atmosphere that creates. It doesn't matter. It's in England, in Spain, Italy, Germany, wherever it is. I mean, some of those rivalries on the soccer pitch are intense, and they're a lot of fun to watch and a lot of fun to be at as well. Anyways, Mr. H, anything else to add to tonight?
No,
No?
I've got a couple of questions, but I'll save those, I think, for next Thursday show. I know you and I
Cool.
are kind of running out of time here, but This was good. Thanks for joining everybody. As always, don't forget about the contest. We'll be rejoining you at this time next week to get everybody ready for the inaugural running of the Saudi Arabian GP at Jeddah. That track looks exciting. It's coming together quickly. And we'll be joining you just hours before the cars take the track for free practice 1 and free practice 2 a week on Friday.
Oh, one thing I forgot to ask you. So you're in Dubai right now. What is the time difference between you and Saudi? Because I know that geographically
Same. I think we're
speaking,
the same time
it's still
zone.
it's
Yeah, I think
still
we're
the
the same
same.
time
Okay,
zone. Yeah.
that's cool. Yeah. So who knows? We might actually be able to do that in real time for once, or maybe pretty close to it. Because we always complain that we seem to be out of sync with the F1
Totally.
news cycle. So maybe for once it'll
Uh,
fall nicely into our lap. But anyways. Well, sir, we're going to let you go here, and I know that you've got to get on with your day. So, everybody, thank you once again for listening to the show. Thank you for joining in on the live stream. Once again, happy Thanksgiving. Be nice to each other if you're going out for the Black Friday sales tomorrow. Maybe stay home and do it online instead if that's your thing. Anyways, if you want to get in touch, by all means, do so. Send us a tweet at Scuderia F1 Pod on Twitter. If you want to get in touch via email, you can do so at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com. And on behalf of myself and Mr. Mark Hamilton, have a great weekend. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again very, very soon. Bye for now.